Where did the offense go? And is there any hope of finding it? Welcome into Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you being here. Of course, leave those comments and questions down below. Jason and I will get to it here for the next 45 minutes to an hour. And of course, the challenge this week is Ole Miss on the road. And who would have thought at the beginning of the season, the point spread on this is about 21 points as the Sooners look to find some offense, as we mentioned, have not reached double digits now for 2 consecutive games. Jason, how are you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. How about yourself?
I am doing just fine. And a lot of changes with Oklahoma, of course. Speaking of offense, Seth Luttrell relieved of his duties as offensive coordinator. And certainly the injuries have just been devastating, but somebody has to be the fall guy, I guess. I guess they're also telling us that there can be some plays out there that can be made, and they're just looking for some type of new direction.
Yeah, Mark. It's kind of been it's been a little bit of a whirlwind, and I think for since really kind of since the beginning of the season, but more specifically, conference season. If anything could have gone wrong offensively, it has, right? With, as you mentioned, with the injuries and the Oklahoma's top 4 or 5 receivers. Um, for now have been injured since really the Tennessee game, right? I mean, a majority of them have been out, but with Deion Burks being out since the Tennessee game, and Nick Anderson, tried to give it a go in that game, but still, couldn't really be effective. So, I think you've got that. I think you've got Oklahoma has really missed on a lot of their transfer portal guys over the last couple of years from an offensive line perspective. And then just some youth at the quarterback position has caused, I think, is combination of those 3 things have caused, where Oklahoma is offensively. And I think to your point, it seemed like something probably needed to be done, something needed to be changed. Whether that was, removing Seth Luttrell or whoever, or just kind of making some changes on who's calling plays and things like that. And I think it really got escalated, obviously, after the South Carolina game, kind of from some of the things that I'd heard, and really kind of what Brent Venables had said through his weekly press conferences, that you know through where he's been, whether it be at Oklahoma previously or through Clemson, he's not really been part of a lot of mid-season coaching changes, um, and he mentioned that, and then the next week this is kind of what happened. So I think from just some things, just the way it unfolded early on against South Carolina, it was just, I mean, very very hard to watch, Mark. I mean, just the fact that the game was, I mean, I can't remember a game like this when two fairly evenly matched teams coming into the game, right? And the game was over within 5 minutes. I mean, I think you knew after the initial interception, and then South Carolina punched it in, and then the two turnovers that resulted in a touchdown, off of the turnover, and Oklahoma's down 21-0. And then you think about what transpired to allow that to happen. I think, okay, this game's over. Oklahoma's not going to be able to come back. And credit to their defense. Their defense continues to play hard, play well. But their offense just isn't putting them in a position, in remotely a position to be successful. And so, yeah, I think it was one of those things where, just from what I've heard, was probably going to let it ride, probably through the remainder of the year, make a change after the year. But I think it got to a point against South Carolina where it was, well, number one, too bad to ignore, and then also just when donors start getting involved, and when there is where there is a lot of disgruntlement within that group, that seems to escalate things a bit from a timeline perspective. And I think that's probably a little bit what happened, with with this situation. And I mean, I think a lot, like I said, a lot of people understand that this is it, it's not it wasn't just on Seth Luttrell. Maybe there was some things around scheme and game plan and things like that that were a little bit puzzling, but I think not a whole lot of people would have had success with this team understanding offensively, understanding what they have. But, like when Lincoln Riley made the move from Mike Stoops, sometimes the team just needs a different voice, maybe a little bit of a different direction, and then that's what certainly led to the change this week. Well, actually on Sunday.
So, Jason, I would love to hit these various components that are involved with the offensive issues. So, let's start with quarterback. Of course, Jackson Arnold was the starter and was the guy from day one. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, leading into the Auburn game, or was it the previous? It was the Auburn game that he
Yep.
was that the job was taken from him, Michael Hawkins, of course, and they had that miracle finish in the final 5 minutes or so against Auburn, where they found some offense. And just to underline the injury issues, as you well know, I was watching that game, and when I saw Davion Hester catch that pass, I thought, Javian Hester. And I looked him up. Last pass he caught before that was 2 years ago. He caught one pass the whole season 2 years ago. The last time
Yep.
he made any kind of contribution was 3 years ago on a football team. So you got to go all the way back to 2021, and you're relying on this guy to make a game-changing play.
Yep.
So they miraculously pulled us out against Auburn. And then obviously the last 2 weeks have just been horrendous
Yeah.
offensively. And so they're, of course, hoping that Jackson Arnold has been able to be removed from the situation, watch from the sidelines, continue to practice, continue to work, continue to develop, and hopefully this reset will be a way for him to kind of clear his mind, clear the deck, start over, take a fresh approach, maybe learn some things, because he clearly didn't see a lot of coverages and had a number of issues in some of those games. Tennessee comes to mind in particular. And so dealing with the quarterback situation and trying to get Jackson Arnold in a good place, first and foremost.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. I think that's the hope, and I think that's why they went back to him. And it's kind of weird. It's been two situations in games this year, Mark, where the starting quarterback was just performing at a level that they just had to be taken out, right? Against against Tennessee, Jackson Arnold just was horrible in that game. He was not accurate. He was making bad decisions in the RPO game, turned the ball over a couple of times. And then, when Hawkins came in, provided some energy to the team, and then as you mentioned that the Auburn game, kind of the miracle finish there, and then you started to see against Texas, started to see a little bit of his youth take over. I think Kirk did a really good job on the broadcast mentioning, at his age, from a maturity level, he's making one read and then he's taking off, right? And so with the injuries at the wide receiver position, kids just aren't getting open, and so it was a little bit of a recipe for disaster. Not that he played horrible against Texas, but just really wasn't able to get anything going in the passing game consistently. And then when you move to South Carolina again, I don't. I wouldn't say that all of this was his fault. There was some interesting decisions that were made in terms of how Oklahoma was blocking the two really good defensive ends. For South Carolina, really was kind of chipping them with a tight end one-on-one and just caused some problems early on in the game. Obviously, you still have to take care of the ball, but still causing some problems in that game. And so again, for him in that game, it was in a position where he'd turned the ball over three straight possessions and just couldn't really get him in a position where he could continue in the game. And so Jackson came in. He did some nice things. Again, still made some. I think the problem that he's having, the biggest problem, Mark, is obviously he's not always getting enough time in the pocket with the offensive line. Offensive line gave up 9 sacks against South Carolina. But I think he does have the ability to kind of stand in there in the pocket and survey the field a little bit. Got a little bit more experience from that perspective. But the problem that he struggles with is he waits. He's waiting for his receivers to be open. He does not. He's not at the not at the level from a quarterback perspective that he's able to throw guys open just yet. So I think that's one thing. That you'd look to see improvement out of him throughout the coming weeks, the rest of the year for him while he's in there, assuming that he stays in there, is being able to anticipate guys being open, being able to move around in the pocket a little bit, being able to just like I said, just throwing guys open, anticipate they're going to be open because at this level against SEC teams, especially with the youth and the wide receiver room right now that's on the field, if you're waiting for guys to be open, that's probably not going to happen too often. You've got to be able to anticipate, throw them open, and identify where those opportunities come from. And so it'll be a interesting test for him, and to see what that looks like. Obviously, going through the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's a difficult ask for a quarterback to trust a guy that was supposed to be the sixth or seventh option on a team to suddenly be your first or second option throwing the ball downfield. And if they don't have the athleticism to gain separation, then they most likely don't have the same athleticism is called upon to throw a jump ball or a 50-50 ball and expect them to go get it.
Yep.
If they didn't have the athleticism to separate, then that's probably a difficult ask as well.
Yeah.
At the wide receiver position, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a couple consecutive weeks here that there was some hope that Deion Burks would come back, that he was listed questionable, I know, once or twice, but he's not stepped back onto the field. And so I got a two-part question. Number one, is there any hope that any of these guys come back by the end of the season? And number two, out of the replacements you've seen, who would be the most likely candidate of somebody that can be developed and that has some upside to make some plays?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, Mark, it's kind of it's interesting. I'm not so I know this was I think this was a upper, like a really big thigh bruise that he took against Tennessee. So those things take some time. I don't have a whole lot of inside knowledge as far as this. I saw some things before the South Carolina game where he was running around, jumping, dancing, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, if he's doing those things, then I would assume that he feels good enough to play in the game. But he didn't. Once they started kind of going in the shell drills and before the game, he did not have he didn't participate in that and obviously didn't come into the game. From what I've heard this week, he'd had. I mean, and this is just kind of par for the course for what Oklahoma's been through this year. He had a little bit of a setback early on or at midweek and re-injured this, so I wouldn't anticipate him Saturday for sure. At this point, Mark, I mean, he's probably the only guy that I would anticipate that could potentially come back at any point this year. I don't think Nick Anderson is coming back. I don't think Andrell Anthony is coming back. If then the other couple, obviously Jaden Gibson was lost for the year. I mean, I think there's an outside chance that you could see Jalil Farouk come back this year. So I mean, if you had to ask me now, I don't think any. I would err on the side of caution and say none of them come back. But believe what you will about this, I think all of them have told Brent Venables that they want to come back next year. All of them have the opportunity to come back. Jalil Farouk's a little bit different. He'll probably, I mean, I'm sure he'll have an injury, waiver as far as that goes. But I guess at this point, they've all indicated that they would like to come back and return for a season next year. And so to your question about who's the guy, I think Brennan Thompson probably is that guy. He's the deep threat. He's kind of gotten to a point where he's a little bit better that in that intermediate passing game. But Mark, he's a guy that is at least against the last couple of weeks against South Carolina and even Texas, he's been open quite a bit. Oklahoma's just not been able to find him, whether it's pressure, um, whether it's pressure in their face from an offensive line perspective, or if it's just locating them on the secondary reads. They're just not. just not able to be there, just not able to connect on those. So he's probably the one that I would mention. I mean, kind of funny. It'll be interesting to see like how much playing time this kid gets. But walk-on Jacob Jordan played a substantial amount last week, had 6 catches for 85 yards, the second most receiving yards that Oklahoma has had in a game all year long, and it came from a walk-on guy that just kind of got an opportunity. So I mean, it'll be interesting. He's kind of in the mold of a Drake Stoops type of guy, possession receiver type of thing. But it's as you go back. I mean, the problem is at every level of this Oklahoma offense. And as you look at we've talked about the quarterbacks. We've talked about I haven't talked in depth about the offensive line, but we've talked about the injuries at receiver and the running back position. I mean, Gavin Sawchuk basically has not been a factor at all this year. Javante Barnes, I mean, he's just got a lot of limitations in terms of he always consistently gets tackled by the first guy, does not have the ability to make somebody miss, and so they don't have any game changers at the running back position that can kind of lean on. Tight end has been a little bit of a disappointment. Bauer Sharp has not produced as well as I think a lot of people thought he would. So you say this kind of tongue in cheek, but where's the offense going to come from when you look at those things? And it's just I don't know. It's ironic that this is just such a 180 conversation from what we've had. Previously, like this is the defensive conversation that we've had, but this is at a level that Oklahoma has not experienced on offense since the late '90s under John Blake. That's is worse as it's been for this Oklahoma team. And I mean, you've got here averaging 18 points a game um, over. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's completions. I was looking at points, but still where they're at. As you mentioned, they have not gotten to double figures over the last 2 weeks. Obviously had the one big touchdown pass last week, and then really didn't threaten until late in the game against Texas. So um, I think this I think the defense. I mean, I think if there's a situation where Oklahoma, maybe not this week against Ole Miss, but in some of these games, you think about if Oklahoma can get to 17 to 20 points, then you think their defense probably will be good enough to put them in a position to win those games. But it's just when you look at this point in the season and your leading rusher has 300 yards
Hmm.
in 7 games, it's just one of those things like who would be successful running this team at this point? Are we running this offense at this point?
3.5 yards per carry. That is a stat that you don't see much. If you're going to look at the worst teams in every conference, that would be the place you would go. Go look at the 2 worst teams in every conference, including the Sun Belt and everywhere. There, you're going to see teams that struggle to run the ball because then that just outlines that you have a weak offensive line. You're not, of course, supporting the running game or the passing game. It's going to be more difficult to throw. But man, this is a rushing attack that's used to having guys that are hitting minimum 5.5 yards per carry,
Yep.
6.5 yards per carry year after year after year. And when the 2 guys that you recruited and signed as being the future are at 3.5 and 2.1 yards per carry. Wow.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So I think, I mean, not that they would necessarily say this within those walls, but now you're at the point, Mark, where you're trying to find that 6th win. So I think that's got to be the goal the remainder of the year is how do you get to that 6th win? I mean, assuming, and maybe this is a bad assumption based on how this offense is playing, but I mean, you assume that you should be able to beat Maine. Obviously, you should be able to beat an FCS team, although they did beat number 5 Villanova last week by 28 points. So it's not maybe a low tier FCS team. But having said that, you obviously you think you can get to 5 wins. Now, where can you find that sixth win? I mean, they're going to be an underdog, obviously, in the remainder of the games, probably a pretty sizable underdog in most of these games. So how do you find that sixth win? Like, what's the recipe to get a sixth win and to get some of those extra bowl practices and get and see some kind of success to end the season?
We appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We talk Oklahoma football with Jason on a regular basis. And of course, check out at the other team channels. We do have an Ole Miss channel that we just started a few weeks ago. So please check that out. And we've got an Ole Miss live stream that we just started. Yeah, just here in the last 5 or 6 weeks. These two get together at noon Eastern time on ESPN. And once again, look at that figure, 20.5 points. Now, Ole Miss did lose as a 17 or 18-point favorite earlier this season at home against Kentucky. But it's kind of tough to cover 20.5 points when you're only scoring 6 or 9 a week, as has been the case the last few times out.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a significant challenge for Oklahoma for sure. I mean, as you mentioned, Ole Miss has been a little inconsistent, this year, right? So they just really kind of laid an egg against Kentucky. Did not play well, particularly on the offensive side of the ball in that game. Played much better, obviously, against South Carolina, winning that game. I believe that was a 27-3 victory. And then probably somewhere in the middle against LSU. Didn't play a bad game, but LSU is kind of righted the ship to a certain degree. So, but I think the bad thing, there's I mean, to compound bad things on bad things, Ole Miss is coming off of a bye week. They are also in a situation where they can't let another one slip by, right? So they could probably fight their way back into a playoff discussion. Being ranked, I think they're number 18th right now, 18th or 19th in the country. So, if they're able to win the remainder of these games through the year, then they do have an opportunity to get themselves into a playoff spot. So both of those things, don't really bode extremely well. I mean, I think the other thing, on this matchup defensive for Oklahoma offense against Ole Miss defense is the fact that they're really good up front, particularly at the defensive tackle position. And so after Oklahoma gave up 9 sacks against South Carolina, I think you have to think that Ole Miss is going to be very aggressive in going after the quarterback, especially in predictable, third and long or predictable passing situations. But I think they're only giving up 10.5 or 10.6 points per game, through the year. So yeah, it's going to be a big challenge. And I mentioned the defense a little bit earlier. Defensive. I mean, there was a stretch against Texas where they didn't play particularly well second quarter. I mean, really, they played pretty well. I mean, really well in the first quarter, then, a lot better in the second half. But this is a defense at some point, and it really hasn't happened yet. I don't know if it will happen. Kind of speaks to the leadership that they've got on that side of the ball. Is I mean, is there going to be at some point where they just have, I guess, point fatigue in terms of, okay, we give up 14, 17 points, but we don't believe. I mean, our offense isn't going to score enough points to win this game. So do they take their foot off the gas at any point? So I think that'll be something to watch for. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that Oklahoma has I think coming into this game is the fact that they, I think Oklahoma doesn't have really anything to lose. Ole Miss has a lot of like pressure on them to, kind of finish the season the right way. I mean, I think another thing that'll be interesting to see is, I mean, on the offensive side of the ball, if Trey Harris is healthy enough to play. I know that he's listed, I think, questionable and he's in the injury report. He's by far their best receiver of in the season, 987 yards on 59 catches, and the closest one to him is Caden Lee that has 27 catches for 429 yards. So in it's been kind of an atypical Ole Miss team. Not, I mean, they've got Parrish Henry, who's been their leading rusher, who's, he's performed pretty well, but outside of that, they don't have a whole lot of big time guys. So I think it's Oklahoma has maybe the potential to hold Ole Miss to 17, 24 points, but I think can Oklahoma get there on offense? And does the offense give up any points, right? Like on a pick six or a fumble like last week, or is it a situation where they turn the ball over? I think if Oklahoma can play ball control offense, which they really haven't throughout the year, but knowing what the strength of this team is, if they can play um, ball control offense and punt instead of turning the ball over, then they'll give themselves a chance to, I mean, if not stay within the number, give them a chance to, perhaps play the game tight. And Mark, some of these teams, when you have a bad team going into a good team, and that's pretty much what's going to happen the remainder of the year outside of Maine, with Oklahoma having Missouri, Alabama, and LSU outside of this game. You do see a lot of times where, at least for a game, uh, the team that maybe isn't playing super well finds a way to catch fire, catches some breaks, and plays well. So maybe that'll be this week for Oklahoma.
And Jason, the other consideration in this that comes to mind for me, at least, is that we've arrived at the point in the season where Oklahoma is not used to this. Maybe they were to a certain extent 2 years ago, but where you're not making decisions necessarily just with the thought that we want to win a championship. We're trying to get to a conference championship game. We're trying to get to a playoff. We're trying to get to this. We're trying to get to 10 wins, whatever the case might be. It's about, okay, yeah, we would like to finish with the best record possible, but the season's kind of lost. Therefore, everything that we address, we got to think about the long-term ramifications. So, for example, Jackson Arnold, they put all their chips to the middle of the table with Jackson Arnold last offseason. They have to also be making this move to get Jackson Arnold back in the lineup to look at him for another, 5 games?
Mhm.
Hopefully 5 starts to determine, do we count on him for 2025 or do we need to go shopping?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of long-term decisions that are, I wouldn't say that are being made right now, but there's a lot of long-term discussions that are happening. And I think, I mean, most of us know this. It's not been said, but Joe John Finley will not be the offensive coordinator next year. This is an interim role. He's not going to be, very likely won't be on the coaching staff next season. So I think, yes, to your point, from a quarterback perspective, there's going to be a lot of decisions that are going to be made, whether or not Jackson Arnold or Michael Hawkins will be part of this team next year, right? Will they will they go elsewhere? To your point, does Oklahoma go shopping and try to get a portal guy? I think they'll probably get one way or the other, whether it's out of necessity, or maybe whoever Oklahoma brings in as the offensive coordinator, some guys could end up following him or something like that. So yeah, um, I think for this year, you got to see what you have with him. If he's a guy you want to try to roll with in the future, or if he's a guy that is, he was highly, highly recruited. Everybody wanted him. He's a five-star quarterback, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country. So, I mean, it's not one of those things where Oklahoma just grasping for straws at this guy or missed on this guy, but it's one of those things where you just have to see if this is a guy that can kind of take you into the next tier of uh, of where Oklahoma is. And I know there was a comment here about Brent Venables being on the hot seat. After next season. So I think what he does with this offense in terms of initially what this long-term hire looks like next year, is ultimately going to seal his fate, I think, one way or the other, right? Like he's done a tremendous job in getting the defense back to a level of respectability, and he's really stepped away from that this year, and they've played really well. And and so it'll be interesting. You could go if Oklahoma doesn't spring an upset. When you look at this, out of 3 years that Venables has been here, 2 of those years could be losing seasons. That doesn't you can't do that very often and still make it at the University of Oklahoma. So I think next year it's not anything where he has to make the playoffs or anything like that, but I think who he's able to bring in from an offensive coordinator perspective and what that offense looks like from, if they can get to 7 or 8 wins. I mean, I would say probably 8 wins. He's probably in a good spot because he's shown that he can kind of come back from where this is at. But and right now it doesn't it's the trajectory has to improve dramatically because Oklahoma, as we sit here right now, never thought we would have said this at the beginning of the year. Didn't really think that Oklahoma would be a contender for the SEC, but at the same time, I don't think I would be sitting here saying that Oklahoma's probably the worst team in the SEC. I mean, there's probably no probably to it. They are. I mean, I don't think Oklahoma's a better team than Vanderbilt right now. Vanderbilt's much better than me and you ever thought they would be this year. But they're not a they're so it's easy to say that they're the worst, and they're the worst Power Four offensive team in the country. And so, what do you what do you do to fix that? I think that's the marking of how his career will be defined at Oklahoma. What's we see that you fix the defense. Okay, now fix the offense. And if you can't, then either next year or the year after, Oklahoma's probably looking for another coach. But if you can, then I think he's the guy because everybody wants him to succeed. I mean, he is very well liked, respected, loved within the donor community, within the Oklahoma fan base. But like I said, you can't have multiple losing seasons and typically live to tell about it.
Got Jason Ray here talking Oklahoma football with us here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you all stopping by. Jason and I get together on a regular basis to talk OU. And of course, the Rebels are the opponent in Oxford this weekend. Ole Miss pretty much needs to run the table to keep their college football playoff hopes alive with 2 losses thus far. And while we're talking big picture and difficult decisions and tough decisions that need to be made, when Oklahoma is recruiting at the level that they're expected, of course, they're bringing in top 5 to 15 classes. Therefore, those guys have a lot of options. And so we'll see if they have such strong relationships and commitments from these guys that are already committed to this class that they're undaunted by the record, what it looks like right now. They enjoy Brent Venables and the coaching staff and what Oklahoma University is all about in the football program, and they are committed to it and see this as just a blip on the radar and a lot of injuries, and they are committed, or whether we'll see some kind of fallout. Because I got to think that there's going to be some negative recruiting out there to try to flip some of these guys.
Yeah, no, I absolutely would think so. And I think it's brings a little bit more when you make a coaching change in the middle of a season. I think it makes it makes the process escalate a little bit faster, right? So I think to your point about the recruits, I mean, these recruits that have been committed to Oklahoma, they number one, they want to know who they're playing for. They want to know what style of play um, that they're playing, and they want to know who the next guy is going to be. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's a big part. Even though they're in the middle of the season, like there's some conversations that are happening out of this, on this from this permanent OC perspective. And so, yeah, there's going to be some quick decisions, and with the transfer portal being what it is, the early signing period being what it is, and things like that, it just kind of brings a necessity to probably have someone identified. I don't know, Mark, like you're going to want to have somebody that identified probably in the late November, early December timeframe, and kind of depending on if that person's involved in the playoffs or if they're not, then. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how quickly they move, and just what are some of those names that they might be talking to.
We are just a few days away from the calendar turning to November, which means the National Signing Day is only going to be about 5 weeks away from that date. So it's coming quick. The season's going to be over before we know it. And for Oklahoma, it may really be over before anticipated. Again, that bowl spot, that postseason appearance is a bit tenuous right now at 4-3
Mm-hmm.
overall. Yeah, when you said a few minutes ago about Oklahoma being the worst team in the SEC, that's the first time I really thought of it that way. Because I guess, like most people, I go into every season assuming Vanderbilt's the worst team in the SEC.
Yeah.
They quickly showed that they're not the worst team in the SEC, and then I think I put Mississippi State in that spot quickly after that. They're playing much better.
Mm-hmm.
They're being competitive at least. Can't remember if they've won a game in the SEC.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Played Georgia well, played Texas well to a certain extent, and have played some close games. Played a decent game against Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
Florida was in that conversation for a while. They've played better, a little bit better than expected in recent weeks. Yeah. If you're going to choose a team to play in the SEC right now, you're going to choose Oklahoma, because you just figure, even though that defense is like, I had somebody call me. This was prior to the Texas game, and somebody called me and they started talking about Texas isn't going to play a real team until they play Georgia, blah, blah, blah. And
Mm-hmm.
I pointed out, well, Oklahoma's got maybe a top 10 or 12 defense in the country. They have a really good defense.
Mm-hmm.
And this person was completely unaware of that. So, but as a complete team, it's just, it's an offensive game, and it's tough to overcome when you have just the Texas game in particular. The thing that I remember was that I think there was no score after one quarter, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, and it was 7-3 at some point in the second quarter, and then it was fumble, and the defense is on the field defending like a 20-yard field, 25-yard field, and you're facing one of the best offenses in the country, and
Yeah.
your back's going to break at some point, because there's just no way to play like that when you fumble the ball twice in a row in a 7-3 game, where you're just trying to hang on and scratch and claw and hope that something positive happens, that you can think about an upset going into the second half. And it was just over like that.
Yeah, it really was. And I mean, I think that's the recipe for Oklahoma to, be competitive in some of these games, is in turn, like I said earlier, and instead of fumbling the ball, turning the ball over, give the ball over to your defense so you have an opportunity. Oklahoma actually did, you know, ironically enough, did kick the field goal, I think, in the second quarter to start that game. Then Texas scored
Okay.
all those points in a row.
Yep.
But yeah, but still, I mean, the point remains is, you know, for years Oklahoma has really played to its offense, like try to score. I mean, obviously, it's trying to score as many points as they can, and an up tempo. And so I think they need to be able to be in a position to, um, to play to the strength of their defense, and not try to force plays, and do things like that for, um, to be successful. Just play to your defense, and we'll see if Oklahoma can do that and not turn the ball over at an alarming pace. Then yeah, they could have a chance in some of these games. But yeah, it the margin for error is so thin with this team. And yeah, and I think the point. I mean, the Auburn and I think the Mississippi State is the worst team than Oklahoma. And I mean, obviously Oklahoma won the game, so you have to say, I guess you technically have to say that Oklahoma's maybe a better team than Auburn. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, to me, watching that game, um, it was more of a Auburn losing the game versus it was an Oklahoma winning the game. When you go back, stats can be misleading, but Auburn outgained Oklahoma by over almost 200 yards in that game. And and with the turnovers and with the interception and then the long play, Oklahoma. I mean, they made the plays. I mean, you can't discount that without a doubt. Um, but I think you also you also saw what Auburn has, and that's kind of what they've done this year is give games away. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's a situation, Mark, in this season. It's hard for, I think, a lot of Oklahoma. I wouldn't say give up, but I think most people understand where they're at now, right? It's a much bigger, massive rebuilding situation than I think anyone thought. I mean, I think a lot of people, including me, thought that this was a team that could figure out a way to win 8, 9 games and put themselves in a position next year, to be that team that could potentially challenge for a playoff spot and then get to the top tier of the SEC. But obviously, I mean, you have to think that that's probably a few years away. And like I said, you don't want to belabor the point, but how Oklahoma is able to not only hold on to these recruits, what they're able to do in the transfer portal, but then most importantly, um, who they're able to get from an offensive coordinator perspective. And I think it's got to be it's got to be a splash hire. Like we know, it's got to be a guy that has had a lot of success, not just periods, a couple years of success, but established success. And so, I mean, whether that be a big time offensive coordinator at a blue blood school, or whether it be maybe a big up and comer at a group of five school, or just someone that's newly in a good position. um, it's got to be the right hire, and it's got to be one that's going to propel Oklahoma to where they need to be in the SEC from an offensive perspective.
And in the meantime, Jason, of course, Oklahoma fans can hope for and then gather as much joy as possible from any big game that Texas loses. So, of course, last Saturday night, that was down 23-zip at halftime and getting blown out by Georgia 30-15. I picked Georgia to win, did not expect them to win that easily. I drew up a scenario this week and posted in a video because I believe that there are going to be some chaotic situations in these conference races across college football. And this is just one way in which this could happen. Let's say Texas A&M beats LSU on Saturday, and then they win the games they're expected to win, that they'll be the favorite in, and then they will be an underdog against Texas. Texas wins that game, and otherwise Texas sweeps, Georgia sweeps, and LSU loses this game against Texas A&M. Then they sweep in games that they will be a favorite in every week. We would have a four-way tie for first place in the SEC at 7-1.
Yeah, I mean, and that's very likely. To your point, Mark. It's very likely, and I don't have the tiebreaker stuff in front of me, but it would be interesting to see how that goes. I mean, looking at things, I mean, I actually I was on the wrong side of it. I picked Texas. I thought they would be able to. I thought their offensive line would be good enough, not to control the game, but to be able to control Georgia's defensive line. And it was the opposite. Georgia sort of flexed their muscles a little bit, and I think there was a lot of, they had a lot of incentive in that game, right? Not necessarily just obviously being a very tough road environment in the SEC, but also the fact that a lot of people counted them out, didn't think that they would be able to win the game. So yeah, I mean, looking at it, I still think Georgia and Texas are probably the two best teams in the SEC. But the point is valid that Texas has not really. I mean, some of these games that they've had early on looked to be big tests, but turns out, the teams haven't been what we thought they were. Michigan's not anywhere near as good as they've been in the past. Obviously, Oklahoma the same thing as we've talked about. So Georgia was clearly the best team that they've played, and they really haven't played anyone that's as close to them skill level wise. So I'm really interested to see how they bounce back against Vanderbilt. Obviously, Vanderbilt's won a couple of SEC games, beat Alabama, really impressively beat Kentucky. I thought that was a game that they would lose just based on the high, coming down from the high of beating Alabama, but they showed a lot of maturity as a program going in there, in winning that game. So very interested to see how that turns out. There is a chance. I mean, for people that people here that love to see Texas do poorly. I mean, there's still a chance that they could not make the playoffs, believe it or not. If they happen to drop a game to Vandy or to Florida, whoever that might be, and then obviously they play Texas A&M the last game of the year. So, but it'll be wild to see how the season ends. But I still think, I mean, Georgia still got to keep me honest here. I need to look at their schedule. They still got a tough. Do they go to Tennessee? They have a tough, one more really
Yes,
tough road game, I
they
think.
go to Ole Miss and they go to Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, if they can it'll be tough. I mean, if they can get through both of those games um, unscathed, but I don't know. I mean, those are two tough wins to get, particularly at Tennessee, but also Ole Miss as well.
Absolutely. Yes, as we noted, the Ole Miss games on the road, the Tennessee games on the road. Um, all right, folks. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We've got Matthew Miller in the chat. He does the Texas show. That's every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time over on the Texas channel, and does an SEC live stream uh, on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So, a Texas show, got an SEC show with Matthew. All right, Jason, I guess we'll hope for the best here on
Mm.
Saturday, but my goodness, there'll be cause for celebration if there's a touchdown scored at any point in this game on the Oklahoma side.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when and this is a little bit coach speak, Mark, but I mean, you still want to see you want to see the kids not quit. You want to see the kids continue to play hard, continue to give that effort, that you would expect, and act like they still care. I mean, I think the one thing that's interesting, typically, I mean, it happened when Mike Stoops was released, and Oklahoma had the interim DC there. That you typically see the first couple of weeks, there is kind of a rejuvenated energy and newfound energy. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, maybe going on the road is probably the best thing, for them, right now. With that being said, so we'll see. I mean, that they could have, but man, it's such an uphill climb with what Oklahoma has from just what they're playing with, not only as we talked about every portion of the offense. So, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they can play ball control, if they can eliminate the turnovers and punt when they need to, as opposed to turning the ball over. Then I think they have a chance to stay in the game. But if they turn the ball over a few times, or if they give up some big negative plays on offense, that I think that's could be a recipe for disaster. So, but we'll tune in at 11 a.m. and see what happens.
All right, folks, you can also tune in to our what is typically a post-game show on Friday nights. We go live after the games to take your calls, but the games are so late tonight. We got a 10:30 Eastern time game with Boise State and UNLV that could be a quasi playoff eliminator, as those teams are vying for not just the Mountain West Conference, but the best, possibly the best resume in the group of five. So that's an interesting one and an important one. And also, you got Rutgers and USC going at it on Fox, and that's at 11 Eastern. So we've decided to do pregame. So we'll see you at 9 to get you set for kickoff at 10:30. And that way I get to watch the games too. All right. Good stuff. Jason, appreciate you doing this, and good luck on Saturday, and we'll get together soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Mark.